Okay, Rabbi Isai, we're on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph at the two dots. The Mishnah had said that there's a machlokus between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon as far as how much a person needs to eat of a forbidden substance, and here the example is tevel, in order to be liable for malchus. The Chachamim had said that you need to eat a kazayas. And Reb Shimon argued, and he said, you can eat a kol shehu, you can eat even the smallest amount. And the proof that he brought is from, wouldn't you agree, Reb Shimon says to the Chachamim, that if a person eats a namala, if a person eats an ant, a small insect, he gets malchus. And the Chachamim's response to him is, well, that's different, that's a bria. That's a self-contained, created unit, and therefore even smaller than a kazayas you get malchus for. So let's unpack this a little bit. Amar of Bibi, Amar of Shimon ben Lakish, machlokas bechita, avol bekemach divrei hakol kazayas. Rav Bibi quotes his Rabbi Reish Lakish as saying that the only time there's a machlokas between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim is if a person eats a whole wheat kernel that's tevel. Do you get malchus for that or not? The Chachamim say you don't because it's smaller than a kazayas. Reb Shimon says you do because it's a self-contained unit. But everyone would agree, even Reb Shimon, that if a person were to eat less than a kazayas of ground flour, in which case you're not eating a self-contained item, so then you would not get malchus. Reb Yirmiyah Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish kemachlokas bezu kach machlokas bezu. And Reb Yirmiyah quotes the same Rabbi Reish Lakish, saying just the opposite, that Reb Shimon would hold that even if you eat the smallest amount of ground flour, you would still get malchus. So Tanan, let's look at the Mishnah. Amar lahem Reb Shimon, iatem modim li ba'ochel namala kol shehu chayav. Amar lo mipnei shehi kibriyasa. Amar lahen avchita echas kibriyasa. So the back and forth in our Mishnah between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim is, Reb Shimon says, don't you admit that if you eat an ant you get malchus? They said, yeah, but that's a bria. So Reb Shimon says, eating a wheat kernel is also a bria. It's a self-contained unit. So it seems to be clear from that statement in the Mishnah that chita in kemach lo, that Reb Shimon only holds you liable when you eat a completely self-contained unit like a wheat kernel, but if you were to eat flour less than a kazayas, he would agree that you don't get malchus. So the Gemara says no. L'divreihem ka'amar lahu. L'didi afilu kemach nami. L'didchu oduli mihas techita echas kibriyasa. Not necessarily. I could read the Mishnah like this, that I, Reb Shimon, hold that when you eat a kol shehu, the smallest amount you get malchus. And as we'll see why in a moment. But you, Chachamim, who hold that in order for someone to be liable for less than a kazayas, he has to eat a bria, a completely self-contained item, a unit, well then at least admit to me that a wheat kernel falls in the same category as eating an insect. So v'rabbanan brias neshama chashuva, chita lo chashuva. And the Chachamim's response to Reb Shimon, which is not in the Mishnah but it's implicit, is that we hold that there's a difference between a living, or at least a creature that was at least once living, versus a vegetation which has no life in it at all, and therefore it doesn't have the same chashivus, the same importance as a bria. By the way, this is halachically very important, because when it comes to issues of bittul, of making an isser null, insects are never batel if they're fully intact. It's only if you were to grind up or puree an insect and it becomes totally blended in, then could we say bittul. Right? Okay, there's a lot to discuss. Tanya kavase de Reb Yirmiyah. We have a brisa that supports Reb Yirmiyah. Remember, what did Reb Yirmiyah say? He said that according to Reb Shimon, you get malchus even for ground flour that's less than a kazayas. Reb Shimon omer kol shehu lamakos la omer kazayas ela inyan karban. That Reb Shimon categorically is quoted in this brisa as saying that the only time that the measurement of a kazayas is significant is only as far as if a person consumes something b'shogeg and wants to know, do I have to bring a carbon or not for having eaten this forbidden substance? Let's say a person eats a kazayas of chaylev, so less than a kazayas, you would not bring a carbon. More than a kazayas, you would bring a carbon. That's why it's significant. But as far as getting malchus, I hold that you get malchus even for less than a kazayas. And here you see Reb Shimon says that categorically, without any qualification. So therefore, it proves that according to Reb Shimon, you get malchus even if you eat ground flour less than a kazayas. Let's go on. The next Mishnah says, Ha'ochel bikurim ad shelo kara aleihim. If a person consumes bikurim, now, who is supposed to consume the bikurim? Really, when I bring my basket of first fruits to the temple, I give it to the Kohen. So we're saying that even if the consumer is a Kohen, but he eats it in a forbidden fashion because he doesn't wait for the bringer, the farmer, to recite the parsha of bikurim, which the Torah prescribes in Parshas Kisavo, that the farmer has to say, Arami Oved Avi, my ancestor was a wandering Aramean, and the yada da 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 da. And now I come into Eretz Yisrael, right? So, Kadshe Kadshim Chutz Lakloim. Or if a person eats the higher level of karbanos, of sacrificial meat, outside the temple grounds, or Kadshim Kalam Maiser Sheni Chutz Lachom, or if he eats lower level Kadshim, such as a karban shlamim, or if he eats Maiser Sheni, and he eats that outside of Yerushalayim, which is the place only that you're allowed to eat those things. Hashover esa etzem bepesach hatohar, or if a person breaks the bone of a korban pesach carcass that is edible because it has not become tameh. So in all of those cases, hareza loka arboin, you get malchus because you're in violation of the negative commandment that you're not allowed to do these things. Aval hamosir betor. However, if a person has no sar meat, meaning that the Torah says, eat the meat of this korban, and you're not allowed to leave over any of it past its expiration date. But if you do, you don't get malchus for that. And v'hashover b'tamei eino loke arboim. Or if you break the bone of a korban pesach carcass, which has become tamei and it's no longer edible, in both of those cases you don't get malchus. Now, the reason for them is different. When you leave over nosar, the reason why you don't get malchus is because the Torah tells you the prescribed remedy for that. It's either because it's alav shenitak la'aseh, or it's because, as we learned before, it's alav she'ein bo ma'aseh. So you don't get malchus for that. And when it comes to breaking a bone of a tamei carcass of a korban pesach, you don't get malchus because the Torah's prohibition is only applying to a carcass that's edible. If this carcass is not edible, you won't get malchus for breaking a bone. Next, Hanotel Eimal Habonim Rabbi Yehuda Omer Loke ve'eno mishaleach v'chachamim Omer mishaleach ve'eno loke. Now, what if a person does not fulfill the mitzvah of shiluach hakein, of sending away the mother bird before taking the eggs? He takes the eggs in the presence of the mother bird. What's the remedy? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you get malchus. That's it. Game over. There's no way to sort of repair the damage. But the Chachamim say no. It says in the Torah, shaleach teshalach, you shall surely send away. So they learn the double language of sending away is lechatchila, send away the mother bird before you take the eggs. But b'di'evet, if you took the eggs without sending away the mother bird, then you can send away the mother bird after the fact and remedy the prohibition. Ze'ah klal. Kol mitzvah slosase sheyesh bo kumasei ein chayav en oleh. And therefore that leads to the general rule that if there's a mitzvah slosase in the Torah that is followed by a mitzvah aseh that provides the remedy for that violation, so then you don't get malchus. You just have to do the positive act that the Torah prescribes. The Gemara now says, Amar Rabba bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zu divrei Rabbi Akiva stima ta'a. Aval chachamim omrim bikurim hanacha me'akeves bahen, kriya ein ma'akeves bahen. Now, there are two actions that a person has to do when he brings bikurim. Number one is that he has to place the basket down on the floor of the temple. And number two, he has to recite the parsha of bikurim. He has to actually make a recital. Right. So the Rabbi Yochanan's point is that this whole Mishnah, even though it's authored anonymously, is really like Rabbi Akiva, who holds that the one action that invalidates the bikurim, if it's not done, is the recital. But the Chachamim disagree with that, and they say that the one action that's ma'akev, that makes it invalid if it's not done, is the placing down and not the recital. So the Gemara now says, V'leima zu divrei Reb Shimon stimata. Now, we know that Reb Shimon holds that way also, just like Rabbi Akiva. So why did you, Rabbi Yochanan, say that our Mishnah goes like Rabbi Akiva? You should also say that it goes like Reb Shimon. So the Gemara answers, Hakamashmal under Rabbi Akiva, Reb Shimon Svirale. So the answer is that Rabbi Shimon, we'll see in a brisa in just a moment, clearly states that. So Rabbi Yochanan didn't feel it was necessary to make that point. But he felt it was necessary to make the point that Rabbi Akiva subscribes to Reb Shimon because it's not as explicit or well known that Rabbi Akiva holds that way, that the kriya is ma'akev. My Reb Shimon, so where's this brisa of Reb Shimon who says that if you don't do the recital, the bikurim are invalid? The Tanya usrumas yodecha. Now, in order for us to really follow this next piece of Gemara, we really need to see the pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. The Torah says over there, and I'm just going to read it because I have it in the margin of my Gemara, Lo sucha le'echol bisharecha. The Torah says that when you bring all your gifts to the temple, make sure you eat it there, okay? And then the Torah says, you are not allowed to eat in your gates, which means outside of Yerushalayim. And then it lists all of the same gifts and tithes that the Torah had previously mentioned. Masar deganecha, the tithes of your grain, v'siroshcha v'yitzarecha, and your wine and your oil, uvechoros b'korcha v'tzonecha, and the first of your cattle and your sheep, v'chol nedarecha asher tidor, and all pledges which you shall pledge, v'nidvosecha, and your gifts, usrumas yodecha, and your truma, your hand-picked truma gifts that you give to the Kohen. Now, what do all of these words mean? Reb Shimon has an innovation, a patent. What he does is that he starts looking at the pasuk in this whole list of items of gifts and tithes and says, look at the last item on the list and work backwards. And let's see what all of these things mean. The Tanya, usrumas yodecha elu bikurim. When the Torah, the last item in that list in the pasuk is trumas yodecha. Guess what that refers to? It doesn't refer to regular truma, because that's already discussed in another place, but rather it refers to bikurim, to your first fruits. Amar Reb Shimon, ma bozel l'lamdenu, im la'ochlan chutz l'choma kal v'chomri mima'aser hakal. He says, what is the Torah telling me? That I'm not allowed to eat my bikurim? That the Kohen is not allowed to eat the bikurim? Is it telling me that he's not allowed to eat it outside of Yerushalayim? Well, that's already known from a kal v'chomer that I can't eat bikurim outside of Yerushalayim, because I already know that meiser sheni cannot be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. Uma meiser hakol ochlen chutz l'cham aloike bikurim lo kol shekain. If I get malchus for eating meiser sheni outside of Yerushalayim, then surely I will get malchus for eating bikurim outside of Yerushalayim. And therefore, what must the pasuk be prohibiting? Lo ba kasav ela le'ochel mi bikurim ad shelo kara alein shehu loke. And this is the source for what we're talking about, is that even if you eat the bikurim inside Yerushalayim, but if you eat them before the recital of the psukim, so then you get malchus. So that's how Reb Shimon knows. This is the source text for Reb Shimon saying that if you eat bikurim before the recital, you get malchus. Next.
There's another requirement, koroshen. He has to establish that this is bikurim, koroshen.
Aha. So you're saying that the reason why is because he has to declare it to be bikurim. Okay, very good. V'nidvosecha zutoda ushlamim. And nidvosecha means what? Nidvosecha in the pasuk, which is the one next up, going backwards in the list, your gifts, is referring to bringing a korban toda and a korban shlamim. So it's telling me that I'm not allowed to eat it. But in what state? So Amar Reb Shimon ma bazel l'lamdenu, im la'ochlan chutz l'chama kal v'chomer mi meiser. Halabo akasav ela la'ochel b'toda v'shlamim l'fnei zrika shuhu loke. Reb Shimon says that this pasuk can't be coming to tell me that I'm not allowed to eat a korban toda and shlamim meat outside of Yerushalayim. That I already know from a kal v'chomer from meiser sheni. If I can't eat meiser sheni outside of Yerushalayim, then surely I can't eat a korban toda and a korban shlamim outside Yerushalayim. So therefore, what the Torah is prohibiting is something else. It's prohibiting eating it inside Yerushalayim before the blood is sprinkled on the altar. Uvechoros zeha bechor. We go back one more on the list, and it says the word bechoros. What is the word bechoros referring to? the firstborn animals of my livestock. Amar Reb Shimon madba ze lelamdenu im laochlan chutz lechayma kal v'chomer mimaiser im lefnei zrika kal v'chomer mitoda ushlamim haloba hakasav ela laoichel min habechor afilu laachar zrika shuhu loke. So the Torah can't be coming to tell me that it's prohibited to eat it outside of Yerushalayim, because I know that from a Kal V'chomer from Meiser Sheni. It can't be telling me that I can't eat it before Zrika Saddam, because I know from a Kal V'chomer that if I can't eat the Toda and the Shlamim, which are lighter, before Zrika Saddam, then surely I can't eat the Bechor Karban before Zrika Saddam. Now, why is one lighter than the other? The Gemara is going to speak this all out momentarily. So, therefore, what is the Torah coming to prohibit? It's coming to tell me that even if I eat it after Zrika, but I eat from the flesh of the Bechor, I'm going to get Malkus if what? If I'm a non-Kohen. If I'm a non-Kohen, then I have no right to eat the flesh of a korban, because that meat is specifically for the Kohanim. Next, Bekarcha B'tzonecha, the Torah had said, Becharos Bekarcha B'tzonecha. So what are the words Bekarcha B'tzonecha, which are extraneous? What are those coming to teach? Zu chatas va'asham. This is telling me that I'm not allowed to eat the meat of a korban chatas and a korban asham. So Amar Reb Shimon Maba ze lelamdenu. Im la'ochlan chutz lechoma kal v'chomer mimaiser. Im lefnei zrika kal v'chomer mitoda ushlamim. Im la'achar zrika kal v'chomer mibachor. So, like we just said before, it can't coming to be telling me to eat it outside Yerushalayim. It can't be coming to tell me that I can't eat it before Zrika, and it can't be coming to tell me that I can't eat it because I'm a non-Kohen, because all of those are derived from the previous laws and Kal V'chomer to Korban Asham and Korban Chatas. So halabo akasav ela la'ochel mechatas v'asham afilu la'achar Zrika chutz l'kloim shuhu lokem. What it's coming to teach me is that if I eat the flesh of the chatas and the asham outside the temple, even if I'm inside Yerushalayim, I'm still going to get malchus, even if I'm a kohen. Why? Because the Torah confines the eating of a chatas and an asham to being inside the temple. And finally, nidarecha zu ola. That's the last thing that we're going to learn in the Brisa, going back in the list, your pledges. This refers to a korban ola that I'm not allowed to eat it. So Amar Reb Shimon, Mabo ze lelamdenu im laochlan chutz lechayma kal v'chomer mimaiser im lefnei zrika kal v'chomer mitoda shlamim im laachar zrika kal v'chomer mibechor im chutz lekloim kal v'chomer mechatas v'asham. It almost sounds like Chad Gadya, right? In other words, it can't be coming to tell me that I can't eat it outside of Yerushalayim. It can't be coming to tell me that I can't eat it before Zrika. It can't be coming to tell me that I'm not allowed to eat it because I'm a zor. It can't be coming to tell me that I'm not allowed to eat it outside the temple, because again, kal v'chomer from all of these other things on the list. Ha lo ba hakasuv ella lo oichel min haola la'achar zrika afilu bifnim shehu loke. What must the pasuk be coming for? This phrase to teach me that even if I eat the flesh of a korban ola inside the temple and as a kohen and after zrika, I'm still going to get malchus. Why? Because the korban ola flesh has to be completely incinerated on the mizbeach. By definition, that's what an ola is. Now, that's the conclusion of the brisa. Go ahead.
Just on that recording, so can you say the vidui first and then place it down, or it has to be placed down first?
I don't remember what the Torah says, but I think it says v'hinachto lifnei Hashem Elokecha v'ishtach avisa v'anisa v'amarta. I think v'anisa v'amarta is after you put it down.
So you have to place it first.
Or which one is first? Take a look. Open up Parshas Kisavo and take a chumash and open it up. I don't remember anymore. Okay, so Omar Rava. Rava now says, after we've seen the brisa, dialida ime karib Shimon seilid v'ilolo seilid. So if a woman's going to have a child, she should have a child like Reb Shimon. And if anything less than that, better that she shouldn't give birth. In other words, this is high compliments to Reb Shimon, that when a woman is davening for a child, she should daven that her child should be just like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, because of this brilliance in the brisa. Now, he's going to qualify that in just a moment. Ve'afal gav de'isla hen pircha. Even though everything that Reb Shimon says in this brisa can be refuted. So, on the one hand, he's giving a compliment. On the other hand, he's a great guy, even though everything he said can be refuted. What was the order in the pasuk? is which? Is first or last?
First.
Oh, first you make the recital, and then you put it down. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so what do we mean by this? So what is the pircha? What kind of refutation can you offer to his logic in the brisa? Because he was working with the assumption that bikurim is more chamer than meiser sheni. So my churma de bikur mi meiser sheni, meiser shekein asurim lizarim. Because bikurim can only be eaten by a kohen, but meiser sheni can be eaten by the farmer himself as long as he brings it to Yerushalayim. So that's why you're telling me you're assuming that bikurim is more chamer. But I'll say adarabba, meiser chamer shekein asur laonein, umay chumra shekein asur laonein. But I'll show you that there's a chumrah by Meiser Sheni that doesn't exist by Bikurim. Bikurim you can eat even after you've just buried a relative and you're in a state of aninus, that you, the very same day you've done the burial, you're still allowed to eat Bikurim. But Meiser Sheni you cannot eat in your state as an owning. So maybe Meiser Sheni is more chumrah and you have no more kal v'chomer. Umay chumrah de todu shlomim mi Meiser shekein tunin matan domim ve'imurim legabi mizbeach. Adarabba Meiser chomer shekein tunin kesef tzura. And what was your whole argument why korban toda and shlamim is more chomer than meiser sheni to make a kal v'chomer? Why? Because it's a korban and therefore it is placed on the mizbeach. The blood and the innards are placed on the mizbeach. I'll argue differently. Meiser sheni is more chomer because in order to redeem meiser sheni you need a minted coin. Whereas in order to redeem the holiness on an animal that's designated as a korban shlamim, it can be exchanged for something else of value, even if it's not a minted coin. So maybe meiser sheni is more chamer. Umay chumra de bechor mitodu ushlamim shekein kidushaso meirechem. Adarabba todu shlamim chamrim shekein tu'unim smichon nesachem u'tnufas chazei v'shok. Furthermore, you made a kal v'chomer. You said if a korban toda and shlamim have a certain status in halacha, then for sure that applies to a bechor, right? Why? Because you assume that a bechor is more chamer, a firstborn animal that's sanctified from the womb is more chamer than an animal that is sanctified after it's born. But I'll make an opposite argument, and I'll say that maybe a korban toda and shlamim is more chamer, because a korban of a bechor does not require any of the accoutrements. You don't have to bring libations. You don't have to press down on the animal before you bring it. You don't have to wave the animal before you bring it as a korban. Whereas by a toda and a shlamim, you have to do all of those things. So maybe toda and shlamim is more chamer than bechor. Umay chomer dechatis va'asham mi bechor shekein kodshe kodshim adarabba bechor chamer shekein kedusha asamerecha. You also made a kal v'chomer to say that a korban chatas and asham is more chamer than a korban bechor, because chatas and an asham is kodshe kodshim. It's a higher level of kedusha than a kedusha of a bechor korban. But I'll make an opposing argument that a bechor is more chamer in certain respects because its sanctity begins even before it's born, whereas an animal that's a chatas and an asham only attains its sanctity after it's born. Umay chumer da'ola mechatas va'asham shekein kalil, adarabba chatas va'asham chamir shekein mechapri. And furthermore, you wanted to make an argument that a korban ola is more chamer than a chatas and an asham because it's completely incinerated, whereas a korban chatas and asham is only partially incinerated but partially eaten by kohanim. I'll make the opposite argument. I'll say a chatas and an asham is more chamer than an ola because a chatas and an asham atone for physical sin, whereas an ola does not. So maybe the logic is flawed there also. V'kulu chamiri me'ola de'ispu shtei achilos. And furthermore, you wanted to argue that a korban ola is the most chamer because it's completely incinerated. I'll use a completely opposing argument. I'll say all other korbanos and the special are more chamer than a korban ola because all other korbanos, in order for them to attain their intended purpose, have to be consumed in two venues, partially on the altar and partially by the kohen or the bringer of the korban. Whereas the korban ola is only consumed in one venue, on the venue of the altar. And maybe therefore that makes it less important or less chamer than a korban chatas and a korban asham and a korban toda and all of the other things. So therefore, elamai dialide ime kerib Shimon. So the question then is, okay, you've refuted all of the logic that's contained in this brisa that Reb Shimon offered. Why then are you so lauding of praise to Reb Shimon that a woman should have a child only like Reb Shimon if his logic is flawed? So the answer is, Delamai Desfira Le Lididei Misaris Le Lekra Vidorish Le. So the Gemara answers because Reb Shimon had this innovation. The only way that he was able to make these logical arguments was by working with the pasuk going backwards. You see, because, remember, we had to work backwards because the last item in the pasuk was the least chamer, and we worked our way up going backwards in the list. If we had started with the carbon ola, we wouldn't have been able to make the kal v'chomers that we made to be able to get all of these halachas that you get malchus for eating a carbon ola, right? So therefore, the innovation, that the cleverness and the wisdom of Reb Shimon was be able to decipher the pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was communicating to us in code and telling us that you can read the pasuk backwards. Now, I may have a problem with the kal v'chomers that Reb Shimon makes, but if we could figure out how to answer those problems, you see, it's a beautiful, elegant way that Reb Shimon is able to derive halacha from the pasuk, and that's why we're praiseworthy of him. Okay. So therefore, now the Gemara says, but wait a minute, I have another question. V'chi mashirin min adin, ha'afilu laman do'amar onshim min adin, ein mashirin min adin. But wait a minute, you're telling me basically that based on the kal v'chomers that Reb Shimon has made in the Brisa, a person could get malchus for eating a carbon ola, for eating the meat of a carbon chatas outside of the temple, even though the Torah doesn't say explicitly that this is a mitzvah lo saseh, right? You're basing it on a kal v'chomer. How can you do that? We know that even though the opinions that say that you can derive an onesh from a kal v'chomer, but you can't derive the initial prohibition from a kal v'chomer. So if it's not explicit, how can you base it on a kal v'chomer to give someone malchus? So the Gemara says, you're right, isura ba'alma. We don't, really, the Brisa is not telling you that you get malchus for these things, it's just telling you that we're deriving that it's prohibited from a kal v'chomer and from the kal v'chomers that we've made in the Brisa. But wait a minute, v'ha'amar rava zar sha'achal min ha'ola lifnei zrika chutz l'choma l'Reb Shimon loike chamesh. But one second, Rava doesn't seem to hold that way. Rava says it's possible for a person to get malchus 5 times. If he's a non-Kohen, who eats from a korban ola outside of Yerushalayim before the sprinkling of the blood, he'll get malchus 5 times. Why? Let's think about it. Number 1, he's a non-Kohen, so he's a zar eating kachim. Number 2, he's eating from an ola, which cannot be eaten. Number 3, he's eating it outside of the temple. Number 4, he's eating it outside of Yerushalayim. And number 5, he's eating it before the blood is being sprinkled. So he's done 5 violations, and he gets malchus. So don't tell me it's violations without malchus. He says clearly that you get malchus. So the Gemara says, Chamisha isurin havi. That's not really what Rava meant. He just meant to say that you violate 5 violations without malchus. But wait a minute. V'ha'anansnan Elohein halokin. But wait a minute. How can you say that? Our whole Mishnah is telling us that the following people get malchus, and one of the things on the list for what you get malchus for is bikurim. If you eat bikurim outside of Yerushalayim, or if you eat kodshei kodshim outside of the temple. And if you're telling me that we derive that based on a kal v'chomer, how can you get malchus for that? So the Gemara says, you're right. Elakra yiseiruhu, mechti ksiv v'heveisa sham v'achalta lifnei Hashem elokecha b'makom v'gomer, lichtov rachmana lo suchal la'ochlam, mihadr beforish behu rachmana lamali, ela liyechudei lahu lavi l'chol chad v'chad. So the Gemara says, the way you're supposed to read the psukim is like this. Previously, as I started off the daf today by saying, is that the Torah had said in the positive, you shall bring all your tithes and your gifts and your donations and your pledges, you shall bring them to the temple and eat them there. And then the Torah says, you may not eat your tithes and your gifts and your donations and your pledges outside of the place which Hashem shall designate. Why did the Torah have to repeat all of the specific items if it said in the positive all of those items? The Torah could have just said, you may not eat them. In other words, the aforementioned you may not eat outside of the temple. Why did the Torah re-itemize them in saying in the negative? You have to read the pasuk as if the Torah is saying, Lo suchal le'echol bisharecha, you may not eat within your gates, meaning outside of the temple or outside of Yerushalayim. All of the following items have that lo suchal le'echol bisharecha appended to each and every one of the items on the list in the pasuk. And therefore, it's as if the Torah had said explicitly, you may not eat this, the korban ola, you may not eat this, the korban shlamim, you may not eat this, the korban chatas, you may not eat this, the bikurim, you may not eat this, the ma'aser sheni, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, from here we learn, we're not deriving from a kal v'chomer that you get malchus, but rather we're deriving from the explicit mitzvahs lo saseh, where the Torah says, lo sucha lechol bisharecha, for each and every one of the things that's itemized, and that's how I know that you get malchus for each and every violation. The kal v'chomer actually helps me to derive what kind of violation I have to do in order to get malchus, right? That's what Reb Shimon's brisa was coming to demonstrate. But that you get malchus is not from a kal v'chomer, but rather from the extra verbiage that's in the pasuk. And this is where we'll hold it for today. Wish you a wonderful day.